All right, our last debater is here, so we're going to get started. I'm going to try and fly through this intro so we can get things going. So hello, everyone. I'm Seiya Trahanas. Welcome to Debate for Democracy. I'm the chair of the event, and I'll also be the moderator tonight. A little less than a year ago, Hannah Klingbeil and I held the Discourse for Democracy event in this room. It was a panel discussion with local leaders, including First Selectman Fred Camillo and Congressman Jim Himes, about ranked choice voting, an issue with local and national relevance. Our goal is to strengthen the long-standing democratic institution of civil discourse in our town by allowing the public to see their local political leaders talk about a multifaceted issue. With a sizable audience and a meaningful impact, this event made waves around the community, and the goal of this event, Debate for Democracy, is to continue this tradition of setting a positive example for how to talk about issues that can get heated, especially in politically diverse communities like Greenwich. The key difference with this year, however, is of course that it's students who are setting the example. Tonight, high school students will be debating a particularly multifaceted and relevant issue in our community, the future of housing in America, including affordable housing. Housing is currently at a crossroads in America. Millions of millennials are starting families and looking for places to settle down and buy a house. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is seeking to suppress inflation by hiking interest rates, meaning that it's getting harder and harder for these millennials to afford increasingly demanding mortgages. Meanwhile, builders are working on new single-family homes at the lowest annual rate in 2 years. For renters, inflation has stressed the economy to the point where rent is simply becoming unaffordable in not only urban centers, but suburbs as well. As a result, people have had to make sacrifices just to keep a roof over their head, and in the most extreme cases, they face eviction and homelessness. Homeless rates are rising dramatically, with the highest rates occurring in the most prosperous coastal cities with the lowest unemployment and the lowest affordable housing availability. As we face the future of housing in America, we need to be smart about the way we build, adjust rates, and decide the threshold for access to housing, as well as what the housing itself should look like. So here's some quotes about the crisis from various sources. Builders started work on new single-family homes at a $941,000 annual rate in August 2023, which is 16% below the average pace of construction from mid-2020 to mid-2022. 580,000 plus people are experiencing homelessness on any given night. Nationally, there's a shortage of more than 7 million affordable homes for our nation's 10.8 million plus extremely low-income families.
More than 580,000 people are currently homeless. 70% of low-income families pay half their income on rent, and there is a shortage of 6.8 million affordable homes in the U.S. Through government intervention, this cycle can be broken and housing can be guaranteed. Funding public programs like the National Housing Trust Fund will be the most impactful thing the government can do for this problem, which subsidize renters and people who really need to pay for these houses. These programs can also be achieved at the local level to help those in need get a roof over their heads. And in fact, Connecticut has a similar program to this that needs to be expanded on. The key to the problem is subsidies and grants to low-income families. Thank you.
Thank you, Pombo. We'll now move on to Jennifer.
Hello? Okay. According to American psychologist Abraham Maslow, there are 5 levels in his hierarchy of needs, and the needs are according to the following. Food and housing, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and then finally self-actualization. So how are we going to help others if we are not in a position where we can even have ourselves in a place that is safe? Are we truly in a position where we can sacrifice? In my position, not in my backyard, affordable housing can result in a loss of local businesses and merging community identities, other large infrastructure projects, increased safety risk, straining community responses, and causing a lowering of property value. In a perfect world, if affordable housing is well designed and fits in with the surrounding and is well managed and safe, that would be great. But that is not our reality today. There's high interest rates and low inventory. Reality is that people find it rare to own houses. Thank you.
Jennifer, that's time. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to Alex.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Zakin. I'm a junior at King School, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to my introduction. So, I don't think many of you guys know what nonprofit market housing is. Now, this is a very unknown way to subsidize the housing crisis right now, and it does not get talked about enough. Essentially, what it is a nonprofit will get a loan from a bank, and in return, it will build a housing complex. Now, in this housing complex, the tenants who are in it, they will pay only to pay for the utilities of the building. So it's basically housing not for profit. Now, this is not a new way of thinking of things, but it is a very, very smart way of thinking of things. And I know I'm talking like it's very simple, but it's not. So the point I'm trying to get across is that housing is ultimately for the people, not the profits. And when we talk about people as money and as a monetary gain, we lose that housing is a fundamental human right. Thank you.
Thank you. Aubrey?
I'm Aubrey Niederhofer. I'm a 12th grader from Greenwich High School, and I'm here to tell you about dense housing and its benefits. American urbanism is broken. According to a study by University of Michigan population studies academic William Frey, 45% of Americans live in suburbs, up from 30% in 2000, and that number is rising. Over the same period, home prices have tripled according to Federal Reserve data. Our suburbs are car-dependent, isolating, homogeneous, and unaffordable, and they exemplify and perpetuate America's biggest problems while they grow. The good news is that there's potential for change. The suburbs are not beyond hope. They can be transformed if we rethink the way that we use space. Replacing single-family homes that require expansive loans with denser housing, from townhouses to small apartment buildings, can slowly bring down the cost of constructing new housing. Including this type of housing in our suburbs can make them more diverse and accessible, combining the benefits of suburbia, such as increased privacy, with the benefits of density, such as walkability and access to services. Through the gradual introduction of gentle density, we can transform the American suburbs. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie?
Hello, everyone. My name is Maggie Fleischer, and I'm a junior at the Academy of Information, Technology, and Engineering in Stanford. The issue of affordable housing is not merely about bricks and mortar. It's about the fundamental right of every American to have a place to call home. We must be wary of solutions that inadvertently stifle the very innovation and competition that have helped propel our economy forward. I stand before you as an advocate for a free market approach to affordable housing. I believe that the private sector holds the key to unlocking sustainable solutions to the housing crisis. By fostering an environment of a competition and entrepreneurship, we can use the power of innovation to drive down costs and expand access to affordable housing for all. The free market has a proven track record of delivering solutions where government intervention has failed. History has shown us time and time again that excessive regulation and bureaucratic red tape only serve to hinder progress and limit choice. Instead, we must trust in the power of individuals and enterprises to address the challenges we face. This approach to affordable housing promotes the principles of freedom, competition, and opportunity. Together, let us utilize the free market to build a brighter future with more affordable housing for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Caitlin.
My name is Caitlin Quinn. I'm a 9th grader at GHS, and here today I present to you a vision: Suburbs Reborn. Suburbs are residential towns outside of a city, but still within commuting distance. They are thriving, dynamic communities where families flourish, where children ride bicycles to the local park, and where neighbors share stories together. Greenwich is an example of a suburb, and I think we can all admit that we love it here. In an era where housing costs soar, suburbs are the way to go. According to a Forbes study, suburbs are on average $578 less per month for rent compared to in a U.S. city. Imagine waking up to pure serenity with no city hecticness. Suburbs provide a peaceful break from the urban dissonance, yet pulse with life. Most importantly, suburbs have space, the key for sanity. Suburbs grant us the room to breathe while still being able to know your neighbor's name and share bonds with your community. Our current housing market grapples with the affordability crisis, leaving many families unable to achieve this vision. I stand with you before today to propose a solution that could potentially aid all of those in need of housing in America that lies in the very heart of our suburbs. All in all, with proper development, suburbs will be the future of housing in America, the best future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for those introductions. We'll now move on to Section 1, Priorities. The question is, what is the most important problem to address for the future of housing in America? Caitlin, we'll start with you, 1.5 minutes.
Sorry. Audience, tonight I stand before you, an advocate for suburbs, but more than that, a supporter for the affordability of housing, a crisis that gnaws at the very roots of our society. Throughout recent years, the cost of living has soared, and the dream of home ownership has become a failure. Let me paint a clear picture. 7 million affordable homes shy of what our nation needs to shelter 10.8 million extremely low-income families. These are not mere statistics. They're the faces of our neighbors, our children, our elders. Prior to the pandemic, due to low interest rates and population growth, the demand for housing had drastically increased without the supply being able to keep up. Hence, a housing shortage issue arose, driving the rise of housing costs. Stagnant wages and escalating living expenses made it difficult for many to afford decent homes. But why does this matter? Because housing is the cornerstone of economic and social stability. When children lack safe shelters, their education falters. When communities cannot afford houses, they get displaced into poverty. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition's annual out-of-reach report finds that there is no state where a renter working full-time at minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. 70% of all extremely low-income families are severely cost-burdened, paying more than half their income on rent. In the status quo, the shortage of affordable housing costs the economy $2 trillion a year in lower wages and productivity, while forcing individuals to allocate more of their income to housing, leaving less for spending on goods and services. Our economy gets damaged because of this.
That's time.
As a result, can I finish?
Yeah, go ahead.
For when we solve the issue of affordable housing, we unlock a cascade of benefits: neighborhood safety, reduced homelessness, happy families, and a stimulated economy. Thank you, and let us forge a future where every American can call a place their home.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Maggie.
There isn't enough housing available for people looking for a place to live. This issue stems from a variety of factors, including zoning regulations, permitting processes, and construction costs. Zoning regulations limit the supply of housing by imposing strict requirements on lot sizes, building heights, and allowable land uses. In Greenwich, building heights are capped at 4 stories, and 1/3 of the town's land has a minimum lot size of 4 acres. Zoning regulations also hinder the development of denser, more affordable housing options, particularly in high-demand urban areas with limited space. Permitting processes delay or deter housing development projects, adding time and cost burdens that get passed on to home buyers or renters. Delays in obtaining permits prolong the construction timeline, exacerbating housing shortages and driving up prices. High construction costs, influenced by local labor market conditions, regulatory requirements, and land availability, deter developers from entering the market or pursuing affordable housing projects. Streamlining zoning regulations and permitting processes to allow for greater housing density, which is currently capped at 18 units per acre in Greenwich, and reducing regulatory barriers to construction can all help increase the supply of housing and improve affordability. Incentivizing the development of affordable housing through targeted subsidies, tax credits, or land use policies can encourage developers to invest in projects that meet the needs of low to moderate income households. By promoting a more competitive and dynamic housing market, we can ensure that all Americans have access to safe, affordable housing options that support economic opportunity and social mobility. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Aubrey.
I'm going to go ahead and agree with what the past 2 debaters have told you, that the largest crisis in American housing is affordability, and that essentially stems from the lack of housing supply. And I want to go into the methods that we can address this. So I want to first start by clarifying that I think that the lack of housing supply in areas where it's needed most is a very intentional development. It stems from redlining. At a certain time, if you were of a certain ethnicity, you could not get a home loan to purchase a home in a certain neighborhood. That's now perpetuated through single-family zoning, which essentially serves to perpetuate these social distinctions, which are based on race and class. So how can we remediate this? As she was saying, we need to reform the way that we zone, and we need to make housing more dense in order to make it more affordable. We're all aware that apartments and smaller home sizes make things more affordable, but yet 75% of our country's residential land in cities remains zoned for single families. Dense housing, transit development, and less restrictive zoning policies can make American housing more affordable. Now is not a time to preserve the status quo. Now is a time to be bold and to reform American housing to be more dense.
Thank you. Alex?
I think undoubtedly the biggest problem to address in the housing market is the shortage of affordable housing. So with American wages staying mostly stagnant throughout the last 5 years, housing prices have shot up. And this is, and you can see this through the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, where they say the average national rent has increased by an astonishing 32% since 2017. Now, why is this? Why is it growing so much? Why are prices shooting up so high? It's because of the landlords. Landlords can basically dictate the price in very densely populated areas. And essentially what happens is they make the market. And when they make the market, they can put prices in places where people who should be living in those types of houses aren't able to afford it. Now, how can we solve this? The way we can solve this is by adding more non-market housing to densely populated areas. What this would do is create something known as a unitary housing market. That is where these landlords have to compete with these non-market housing units, which would subsequently lower the mean price of these housing units, because now that so many people have the option to live in these non-market housing units, you have the landlords not being a viable option. Now, this kind of ties into this whole idea that housing is not for profits, it's for people. And that is a fundamental human right. And it is important that we remember that throughout this entire debate.
Thank you. Jennifer?
As a representative of the, sorry, let me turn on my mic. Hello? As a representative of a not in my backyard, I propose the following solutions. First, modular and the biggest issue is definitely affordability of housing. The first issue is modular construction. So what is it? It's basically where components or modules are made in a factory and then transported to the construction site already made, where they will be finally assembled. Modular homes are constructed off-site, but in contrast to normal manufactured housing, they're assembled on-site and then attached to a permanent foundation, which makes them in its nature cheaper. Second, standardizing building codes. Standardized codes often require manufacturers to adhere the building of houses to a certain amount of codes, and these codes vary based off of country. If we are able to just standardize these building codes, we can streamline the production of houses. Lastly, we can also resort to tiny houses in communities separate from ours in order to preserve our current heritage. So, why is it so important that we preserve some aspects of our status quo? It's because we have to pay attention to precedents, heritage sites, specific communities, valuable architecture or land plots. The previous price is already set. When affordable houses are suddenly made, they may cause displacement, and we need something to stabilize us. Thank you.
Thank you. Pombo?
Currently, the biggest problem facing affordable housing is the quantity of housing that is on the market. However, it's really hard to know how many people are currently in short of a house or have lost their house that they have, because estimates of homeless populations don't really touch on the fact that some people without homes have been evicted and go into homes of family or friends for a temporary amount of time. So currently, really the biggest issue is data. And the US government doesn't survey or collect data for housing loss. And according to Politico, 5 to 10 million people lost their homes in just the past year. And we can't really solve a problem like that without knowing who these people are that are losing their homes, or how they lost their homes. And we can only really seek to establish a permanent solution once data like that is collected, because you can't really solve a problem that you don't know what it is. Once that data is collected, we can use initiatives like the National Housing Trust Fund to ensure that people can have their houses and don't lose their houses by paying their renters their landlords whatever they need for the rent that they don't have out of pocket, so that people don't lose the homes that they already have to add more demand for such little supply of houses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those responses. We'll now move on to Section 2, affordability. The first question in this segment is, as mentioned, there's an affordability crisis for prospective homeowners and current renters in America. What's one concrete way you can propose that we can make homes more affordable? Pamba, we'll start with you, 1.5 minutes.
As I have just touched on, the easiest way to make homes affordable is to expand subsidization programs like the National Housing Trust Fund, and to pay renters what they need in order to pay their rent, and to pay that directly to their landlord, and have these renters pay the difference and the amount of money that they can pay, so they don't lose the homes and to add to the demand on such a small supply, as I have just said. Once we keep people in their homes, then we can solve the problems of getting more people in homes and preventing them from losing their homes from other things like natural disasters. Again, according to Politico, 3.4 million people lost their homes due to natural disasters, and we have to, as the United States, protect people from losing their homes from these things and defend them from national disasters so that they have the aid they need once these national disasters strike, so they can keep their house and while they struggle to find a new job or a new new community that they can live with when recovering from these disasters. So the biggest way to make homes affordable is to stop people from increasing the demand and actually keeping them in their house so that nobody needs to get a new house to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Jennifer.
There's really too many concrete ways we can propose to make homes more affordable, but I will focus on two. First is recycling, and second is easy rebuilding. Why are we suffering such a big issue? It's because New York, an example of this is when New York Mayor Eric Adams announced the completion of a 10-story, 120 million, 224-unit Beach 21st Street housing complex that apparently was to support affordable housing complexes. But that's not how it is. You know how rent is in New York. Things just get more and more expensive. So how can we turn towards recycling? The easiest way is if we can buy nearby homes, malls, community centers, and even retirement centers that have been abandoned, and just convert them into affordable houses. This is a way to accommodate for the inconvenience in society, such as the homeless or the unemployed. Furthermore, we can definitely turn towards having tiny houses. So what are the benefits to tiny houses? They have a 30 to 50 year lifespan. The average size is 400 square feet or less, and it is very compact and an effective use of space. So in conclusion, the two ways we should go is recycling and easy rebuilding. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
So, as I touched on nearing the end of my speech, I think undoubtedly the best way to face the housing crisis is to attempt to create an unitary housing market. Now, I'm going to give two examples to show why non-market housing would best be served as a way to subsidize the housing crisis rather than a full-blown solution. When you look at Vienna, 36% of its residents live in non-market housing. Now, in Vienna, they have achieved a unitary housing market in which the rent does not rise extreme amounts. It is not volatile. It stays mostly the same and acts according to the wages of the people in the country. Now, on the other side of the pendulum, you have a place like Hong Kong. Hong Kong, 60% of people live in non-market housing. And in Hong Kong, most of that non-market housing is controlled by government. Now, what this does is it not only hurts the non-market housing market but it also hurts the private housing market. When the government has such a big role, 60% of a role in the housing market, they're going to put restrictions and zoning laws on private housing, making that only more expensive. That's why here in America, we need non-market housing to be a happy medium rather than a high or low extreme.
Thank you. Aubrey?
I want to address the subsidies that some of my colleagues here are suggesting to solve the affordable housing crisis. And I would suggest that subsidies alone can never solve the affordable housing crisis. It's simply not practical in the United States to propose a policy whereby the American government is going to purchase and distribute more than half of the housing supply in any major geographical area. What we need is, as we've discussed, to increase the housing supply so that we can address this in a sustainable way that doesn't require government continued intervention. So how can we do this? So what is a practical way that we can transform our suburbs into more inhabitable communities and our cities into more affordable communities? What we can do is that we can promote gentle density. So this is a concept coined by Alex Baca of the Brookings Institution. So he points out that the majority of land in most of our cities, which are supposed to be the pinnacles of urban density, it is illegal to build anything except a single-family detached house. This perpetuates inequality intentionally. These policies were designed to perpetuate inequality and keep these homes in the hands of white, upper class, and middle class people and out of the hands of people who are deemed undesirable by the communities. If we change these requirements and allow for the natural development of slightly higher density development, that means row houses, small three-story buildings, we can use the same amount of land as one single-family home to create a higher density, more affordable home, and we can do this without damaging the character of the community, as is so often the concern, because these will grow organically in ways that make sense for the community, unlike affordable housing, which is often forced upon communities and only results in a segregated part of a community being created that is not, never integrates with the rest of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie?
I would also like to touch upon some of the discussion of expanding subsidization that some of my opponents have discussed. Not only does expanding subsidization cause people to become too reliant on the government to meet their needs, but additionally, how are we supposed to do this when the land is limited? As I mentioned before, 1/3 of the town of Greenwich's land has a minimum lot size of 4 acres. With these zoning regulations, it's impossible to implement housing where, there's only a certain amount of a building allowed in one sort of lot size. So this approach just does not work. And instead, I would propose the development of accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs, which are small self-contained residential units that are attached to or located on the same property as a primary dwelling. So we would encourage homeowners to develop these ADUs through different incentives. We could offer them, it would offer them an additional source of income because they could rent out these housing units and then they would, again, it would pay off itself. And we could also offer them tax credits and low interest loans to these homeowners to encourage them to build these ADUs. And to develop these ADUs, we would also have to streamline the zoning regulations and permitting processes, which will make the construction of these ADUs easier. Because again, with these zoning regulations that we have in place right now, it would be impossible for us to build these housing units on these locations because of the lengthy process that these people have to go to. But if we get rid of these zoning regulations, if we get rid of this government intervention, we're going to be able to do this, and we're going to be able to build affordable housing that helps encourage growth of the economy and helps encourage competition, because people are going to want to bring up these different housing units that are going to be competitive, and they're going to have to try and figure out how to encourage people to want to live in these housing units. With that, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Caitlin.
As we grapple with the challenges of providing safe, comfortable homes for everyone, we should explore a solution that not only addresses affordability, but also fosters sustainable communities. Although a large number of citizens live in cities, suburbs are actually much more affordable. On average, a home in the suburbs costs $230,000 compared to $431,000 for a home in a city. Now, let me introduce a specific innovative twist to making this happen: 3D printed houses. Yes, 3D printed houses. 3D printed houses are a promising avenue for increasing suburban housing by offering faster, stronger, and more effective solutions. Studies reveal that 3D printed houses can cost 45% less than conventionally built homes. Let's look at some inspiring cases. In Japan, 3D printed houses was made in less than 24 hours. Even larger single-family homes take only 10 to 45 days for wall printing. By comparison, when using traditional methods, it takes on average 6 to 8 months to construct. This technology should be focused on to bring down the cost of construction, granting affordable housing faster to the market. As we envision a future where every family has a place to call home, let's embrace the unity of suburbs and 3D printed houses. By combining innovation, cost effectiveness, and thoughtful design, we can create housing solutions that benefit communities worldwide. Thank you for your time, and thus I affirm.
Thank you for those responses. We'll now move on to Section 2, affordability. Our first question in this segment is, as mentioned, there's an affordability crisis that was the last question. Let's see. Should housing affordability be guaranteed? If yes, then who should guarantee that housing is affordable? Caitlin, we'll start with you, 1.5 minutes.
Housing affordability, a cornerstone of livelihood, transcends mere shelter. It is an embodiment of fundamental rights. Having a roof over your head is a basic human need. Therefore, affordability should be guaranteed. As we contemplate the path forward, let us consider the multifaceted benefits of affordable housing. First of all, child development. Affordable housing provides bedrock for the health and growth of young children, nurturing their minds and bodies. An environment needs to be fostered where children can focus on their studies, dream big, and aspire to a brighter future. Second, economic prosperity. Currently, 70% of all extremely low income pay more than half their income on rent, leaving no room for extra spending. Families with stable housing contribute to local economies, stimulating progress. Finally, safety and security. Affordable housing reduces the likeliness of homelessness while fostering stronger communities, positive interactions, and unity. When families feel secure, they actively participate in community life, creating a virtuous cycle of trust and cooperation. Now, let us address the pivotal question. Who should guarantee housing affordability? The responsibility should be the government's, as it is the duty of elected officials to champion policies that prioritize affordable housing. However, the government cannot shoulder this burden alone. Enter the private sector that plays a crucial role in development, construction, and management of residential properties. Collaboration between the government and private entities is essential. Financial incentives such as tax breaks can impel developers to invest in affordable housing products. By aligning interests, a symbiotic relationship is created where profit meets purpose. In conclusion, our suburbs, the heart of community life, hold immense potential. Guaranteeing affordable housing is an ethical imperative as it upholds the fundamental human right to dignified living conditions. By weaving together the threads of public commitment and private enterprise, we can ensure guaranteed affordable housing for all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Maggie?
While ensuring access to affordable housing is a noble goal, attempting to guarantee affordability through government intervention risks getting in the way of market mechanisms and the efficiency of the housing market, where prices are determined by the interaction of supply and demand with minimal government intervention. Instead of guaranteeing housing affordability, a free market approach focuses on creating conditions that promote competition, innovation, and efficiency, which produces affordable housing. Promoting economic growth and increasing household incomes can indirectly improve housing affordability by expanding the pool of potential homebuyers and renters. Policies that support education, job creation, and workforce development can help lift individuals and families out of poverty, eliminating the need for government intervention. Additionally, fostering a competitive mortgage lending market can increase access to homeownership for low to moderate income households by offering a variety of loan products, encouraging responsible homeownership while minimizing the risks of defaults and foreclosures. While the government has a role to play in addressing systemic barriers to housing affordability, like discriminatory practices and inadequate infrastructure, it should do so in a way that preserves market incentives and encourages private sector participation. This may involve targeted interventions, but should avoid heavy-handed regulations that undermine market efficiency. Since guaranteeing affordability through government intervention is not compatible with a free market approach, policymakers should focus on creating a competitive and efficient housing market that provides opportunities for all individuals to access affordable housing through market-driven mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. Aubrey?
Attempting to guarantee housing affordability through government mechanisms will in reality leave us with a less efficient and less affordable housing market for all of us. I'm going to show you why. The American housing market is worth over $100 trillion. All of the success stories of government-guaranteed affordable housing come from small countries and from city-states where the government had a large part in the development of the housing market in the first place. We cannot look at a $100 trillion bill and say that the government is going to absorb 50% of the housing market. Where is the $50 trillion? What is that, 10 years of the American national budget? Where is that money going to come from when the national debt is already so high? And what are we looking at in terms of a tax raise? So what can we do? We need to address, as I have been stating, the supply question of the housing market. That is what actually limits housing affordability today. It's that we don't have the right types of housing in the right places. Because of this discriminatory regulation that has a history in America, we have expensive single-family homes and we have segregated suburbs. We've heard about some of the benefits of affordability in suburbs. Actually, we often have expensive suburbs and cheap ones which are separate and have wide variations in their desirability. So what can we do? We can encourage the development of higher density housing by relaxing zoning restrictions, and this can bring affordable housing to more communities and guarantee affordable housing to far more Americans.
Thank you. Alex?
Affordable housing shouldn't be a right as much as it should be the national standard. Now, we've been talking about this like a private market, and to kind of put this into perspective, I'm going to talk about another private market. Let's think about the new iPhone. When the new iPhone comes out, everyone gets super excited. Everyone waits in lines blocks long to get it, and some people don't get it. But give it a month or two after a little bit of backlog and everyone gets the phone they want. That's because most private market sectors are able to account for mass consumer want. But right now it's not as easy to build a whole house as easy as it is to make one phone. And for that reason, we can't be considering the private market. We can't be considering the housing a private market. It needs to be more government intervened, because at the end of the day, it's not a fundamental human right to own a phone, but it is to own a house. And with that being said, I think some of the alternatives that have been offered just wouldn't cut it. If someone has a family of 4 and is in dire need of shelter, a tiny house or a 3D printed house might not be the solution. It might not be able to house all these people. We're forgetting that a lot of these families in this housing crisis are not going to be able to fit all their belongings, or more importantly, all their people into these tiny homes.
Thank you. Jennifer?
The first question is, should housing affordability be guaranteed? Housing affordability should be given to those in true need, while we should still acknowledge that houses are made for different purposes and not all houses should be priced the same. For example, affordable housing, let's say it arrives in Greenwich. So what's going to happen, right? Do you really want the house that's built next to yours, copying your design, and then end up selling for a lower price? And why is it actually going to be a lower price? Because if the world discriminates, it becomes rational for supposedly non-biased homeowners to do so as well. And since people's beliefs affect the price of housing, that's what's going to happen. The housing prices are going to go down. You are going to lose value in your house. So what else is there? The second question, if yes, then who should guarantee that housing is affordable? The real question is, who can guarantee housing is affordable? Public agencies aren't designed to be real estate developers, so they cannot operate because they have a lot of rigid rules and processes that private sector companies also have. For instance, they need to procure and have labor requirements. So in the end, public agencies aren't the ones who are going to solve our problem. It falls on us as the public. What can you do? Thank you.
Thank you. Pombo?
Many people on this stage have been proposing the idea of either creating different types of houses that really can't fit families, or removing public funding for individuals that really need to pay for their houses in order to be kept off the streets. However, they can't move into tiny houses with their big families. They need to keep their homes. They can't end up in a different place with a different size house if their house is already the bare minimum. As one of my colleagues on this stage pointed out, that this is not a private market like an iPhone. This needs to be a public market, and the government needs to be able to step in and guarantee housing for those that need it. It can do this by changing zoning laws that prevent the right type of housing from being created, and subsidizing houses that are created that currently fit the demands of the market, and paying for these differences of the increasing prices in housing for everyone that needs it. Because again, this is not supposed to be a private market where landlords and real estate companies control everything. Everyone needs a house. That is a bare minimum. So the government needs to step in and guarantee it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those responses. We'll now move on to our next section, cross-questioning. So far, we've heard introductions, general plans for the future, and answers to affordability. Now, debaters will be given the chance to each ask a question to one other debater. That debater will have a minute to respond. Pombo, we'll start with you. Ask your question.
So I'd like to address my question to Jennifer Yin, right next to me. So how can you guarantee that these tiny houses that you are proposing will work for big families or families at all that need more than one bedroom in order to sustain a good life for their family?
Do you have any prep time, or should I just go?
No, you should just go.
Okay.
There are many solutions to many problems, and obviously one solution cannot apply for all. We have come up on this podium to propose tiny houses, 3D printing, ADUs. There are many different solutions to these problems, and in order to address my colleagues' issue, how are tiny houses going to fit a large amount of people? The reality is they can't. That's why I proposed an alternative solution, which is recycling. We can convert community homes, convert large shopping malls that have been abandoned, and convert these large spaces into spaces where people who truly need houses can go. The homeless and the unemployed can show up there and receive the housing they need. But in terms of the middle income families that are looking for a cheaper alternative to a house, a tiny house is the solution. I mean, it costs $30,000 to build, which is way less than the $1 million starting price of a house in Greenwich. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Jennifer, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. My question is going to address Caitlin Chin. So you proposed the idea of 3D printers that are currently going viral in Japan. But the real issue is, how are you going to build this complicated mechanism and this machinery in the United States? Are you going to ship it over from Japan? And also, is this machinery going to be bigger than the actual house we are going to build? Or else, how are we going to build this giant house with a small machine?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting topic, and I'm glad this question was proposed. So currently, not only 3D houses are built in Japan, actually. In Virginia, there's a project where over 200 3D houses are currently being worked on and will continue to be worked on. So these aren't just in Japan. These are in America, too. In America, being the prime of technology, we have to embrace this new solution that will help people with housing for the future. This is a modern world of innovation, and it will increase in the future. Therefore, this is why 3D houses are a good idea. What was the second part of your question?
The second part of my question is how you are going to build a large house with a small machine.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I don't know the exact size of this machine. I'm not like an engineer. However, I'm sure that if you look online, there will be a lot of resources regarding this. However, there definitely are, as innovation progresses, there will be larger models that can produce larger houses. I know that there was a house in Central Texas that was over 3,000 feet large, which is actually a huge house. That's a really decent house for a family of 4, and that is great, and that shows that 3D houses have been used before, they have been working, and as innovation goes on and technology progresses, they will continue to get better. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, Alex, do you want to ask your question?
My question goes to Jennifer Yin regarding the her recycling plan. So these buildings that you plan to recycle are likely old buildings being repurposed that do not have very good utilities. Do you have any plans in place to either make those utilities better or at least keep them running at the very least to keep these places actually livable if you were to repurpose them?
I think that's a very valid question, and I have 2 points. First, it's better than starting from scratch. As we know, all these proposed solutions here, like subsidizing and like creating new houses, we are all starting from scratch here. It's going to cost a lot of money to hire construction companies, to hire workers, to find a plot of land, to buy that plot of land, and to start building that house. How long is that going to take? 3, 5 years, even 10 years if it's a mansion? It's better to have something already in place, like a community center or a mall, because in that sort of way, we can just build off the basis that is already strong and that core is already there. Furthermore, we can just renovate, and even if something is preserved badly, in a sense, it's still there. Although it's deteriorating, we can fix it. And with public approval and funding, I believe we can make this change. Thank you.
Thank you. Aubrey, your question?
Yeah, so my question is going to be for you, Alex, and it's something that I alluded to in my speech. The American housing market is over $100 trillion. The U.S. budget is somewhere in the realm of $6 trillion. The nonprofit sector is well under $1 trillion. What percent of the American housing market do you think that non-market housing, especially by the government, can absorb? And do you think that that is a realistic solution to the majority of Americans' housing problem concerns when it comes to affordability?
First of all, I think this is a great question, and I think using the 50% example that you used, I do agree that it's not feasible for 50% of the non-market housing to be absorbed by the government. But I think what I failed to talk about is that even 10% of the housing market being absorbed by the government would make an astronomical change in the entire housing market as a whole. It doesn't take as much as Vienna or Hong Kong to create this market system where these landlords have to compete with this non-market housing.
Thank you. Maggie, do you want to ask your question?
My question is going to be going to Pombo. So you mentioned like subsidization and government intervention in housing, but would you recognize that government intervention in housing policies has historically perpetuated systemic discrimination and limited access to housing for marginalized communities?
Yeah, certainly. Historically, that has kind of been what the government has done. But right now, that's not the government's goal. The government's goal is not trying to discriminate neighborhoods. It's to provide homes for the people who need them, no matter who they are or where they come from. And these government programs that we are trying to implement right now, or brainstorm, I guess, are completely different from those that were essentially redlining in the past, where those were trying to prevent homes from being created. But the ones that we are discussing now are trying to create homes and allow people from anywhere to be able to stay where they are without having to leave or sacrifice the home that they are currently in for one of much worse quality or even homelessness. So I think comparing policies like the ones we are discussing right now to those in the past, like redlining, is completely out of proportion, and it makes no sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin, your question?
My question will be going towards Aubrey. So, Aubrey, you focus entirely on making homes denser and transforming suburbs to be even more packed. However, when there are rural areas in our country with houses miles apart, why are you so keen on focusing on making dense areas even denser and less convenient?
Sure. So I want to ask you what kind of landscape of a country you want to live in. Do you want to live in a country that is all one tremendous suburb of the same density? Should we convert every rural area in the country to a large suburb? I would contend that we don't want to live in an entirely suburban society. And while you have given some of the benefits that we have with suburbs, I think that, as I've said, the suburbs have a lot of problems. So our suburbs are often exclusive. I think we can all agree that for the average resident, Greenwich is a good community, but there's a whole lot of barriers to entering a community like Greenwich. The average and even the median housing price are well over $1 million, and that is because of a history of zoning policy that has perpetuated that. If you draw a line in the middle of Greenwich, you can see that multifamily homes can only be built west of a line essentially at Greenwich Ave that extends into western Greenwich. In eastern Greenwich, which is where the wealthiest communities are, and in Bellhaven and south of Bruce Park, where the other parts of the wealthiest communities are, it's only single-family zoning, and some of it is even 2 acres plus. Eliminating those policies and having a more dense community can give the opportunity for lower-income residents to integrate into desirable suburbs while maintaining the benefits of suburban life. So no, the answer is not to transform our rural communities into suburbs. The answer is to make our desirable suburbs more accessible to more Americans. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for those responses. We'll now move on to our third section, new building. But before we do that, just for everyone's timing purposes, we're a little over halfway through right now. So the first question in this segment is, be it dense communities, towering skyscrapers, or traditional planned suburbs, what should our new housing projects look like and why? Pombo, we'll start with you, 1.5 minutes.
So new housing units and projects should seek to create the most affordable housing possible, because that is their goal, to serve the most amount of people for the least cost. And the best way to do it, as I think one of my colleagues said here, is to have higher density housing. And we can do this by removing zoning laws that prevent people from building homes that are smaller, that take up less space, for the same amount of bedrooms or families, and allowing contractors to build these homes that can compete with really expensive homes for a fraction of the price, and thus allowing the prices for homes to drop and lower and stabilize, so that more affordable housing can be bought by those who need it the most, because it's not as space consuming, and it allows construction and also cost of living to be cheaper all around, making living easier for those who need. For low-income people who need cheap housing the most, while also accessing the same benefits that they would normally. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
In response to this question, be it dense communities, towering skyscrapers, or traditionally planned suburbs, what should our new housing projects look like and why? First, it's just my stance, not in my backyard. Second is, we need to find something that is inexpensive yet effective. We need to get rid of zoning laws, and we need to get rid of standardized building codes. These are all pretty universal, like countries have them, states have them, even certain counties have them. These codes just seek to restrict us. We should get rid of them. And our solution are still the same as I proposed earlier: converting and recycling housing. Second, using modular construction. Modular construction is very effective because it's approved by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and its standards are very different and have fewer financial requirements. And they're also built separate from traditional on-site homes, so therefore they cost less. Furthermore, we should turn towards tiny housing to those individuals who are looking for a change and who are in a position where they can buy and renovate and fix their tiny house. Obviously not the homeless or the unemployed, but these are my current solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
All right, so I think housing project size should be entirely dependent on what area you're building it in. And that kind of goes into the point, so it shouldn't be any taller, any bigger, it shouldn't stand out, it shouldn't be too small. And that kind of encapsulates the point that I'm trying to prove here, that quality and size should be similar, if not the same, so we can compete with private market housing. Now, by instituting something like a tiny home, a 3D home, or one of these other examples, you're almost placing affordable housing a tier below the normal housing market. Now, by doing this, you're creating almost a hierarchy by saying you can't afford private housing, you're gonna live in something distinguishably different than what others can live in. And that's why none of these housing projects should stand out in any way. They should be exactly as new, as wide, as tall as anything else in the city, the suburb, or anywhere we build it. Because ultimately, what non-market housing is made to do is add to the supply while also decreasing the mean average of houses. And those are my solutions.
Thank you. Aubrey?
So I want to start envisioning a new type of community by reflecting on the types of communities that we have today. So I've been focused a lot on the suburbs. So let's address traditionally planned suburbs and how they emerged. I would contend that they are essentially emerging from two expediencies that do not exist anymore: an industrial economy, primarily industrial, and a racist social order. So essentially, when there was heavy industry and it was a huge sector of the economy, there was a need to segregate residential landscaping from polluting industry. So we got these sprawling suburbs partly as a result of that, and partly because people wanted to live, or essentially there was a fear of living around people of minorities, so there was this white flight that created these sprawling suburbs. So what we need to do is to reverse this pattern that has created this segregation, because we actually have the opportunity to do this now that attitudes have changed. So we can create communities that are centered around transit connections that contain higher density, so we can have suburban communities that actually serve the needs of our residents and our people sized. And there are already some examples of this. For example, Portland has repurposed its streetcar, brought it back into existence in 2001, and a study from the Mineta Institute of Transit shows that that led to higher density urban development, and that led to economic development, as well as the streetcar becoming an icon of the community. I would caution us against believing that the government has always got it wrong, but we'll get it right this time when we completely re-envision housing. And I would also caution us against thinking that 10% of the housing market going into the hands of the government is at all realistic. I mentioned that's $10 trillion. That's twice the U.S. national budget and at least 5 times the budget of any recent government program. It's not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie?
So in response to this question, I would just like to say that we can have it all. We can have all the different housing projects we want because people can have what they want without impedance on their individual freedom. So we should have housing projects that embrace a range of designs and styles that cater to the preferences and needs of individuals and families. Instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach, as some of my opponents have mentioned, a free market would encourage competition and innovation, which would allow developers to respond to market demand and consumer preferences. So when we're having these developers who are building houses, they're going to look at what the people want, and they're going to build housing based off what the people want. And that, in turn, is going to lower the price of this housing because they're going to have to try and compete with each other and try to compete to get people to buy their homes that they're developing. And so again, we can have all these different types of housing projects based on locations and what the people want. So if we have dense urban areas, we can have high-rise condos and apartments that can provide efficient use of limited space while still having amenities, and they can accommodate a large number of residents within a small area, which would make them well-suited for urban environments where land is scarce and demand for housing is high. We can also have skyscrapers that combine residential and commercial and retail spaces, and we can concentrate this development so that skyscrapers can help limit urban sprawl and preserve green spaces. We We can also have traditional planned suburbs that, with spacious single-family households that provide privacy and tranquility for people who want it. We can have all these different things and increase diversity and creativity in the housing market. Ultimately, the design of new housing projects should be guided by market demand and consumer preferences rather than mandates and or regulations. We need to get rid of the zoning, we need to reform the zoning process so we can allow for this diversity and creativity in the housing market. Thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin?
In shaping the future of housing, the dream suburb emerges as an ideal solution, seamlessly blending tranquility, safety, and accessibility. Imagine a landscape where spacious single-family homes are nestled in green expanses, offering a haven for families. Suburbs are located outside major cities, prioritizing peace with quiet streets and reduced air and noise pollution, yet easy access to big cities where more employment opportunities lie. My colleagues focus on making suburbs more dense, without realizing there are houses in rural areas miles apart. So we shouldn't be making suburbs more dense, we should focus on making rural areas into suburbs. There's no need to make living tight and uncomfortable when it is unnecessary. The essence of suburbs lie in its provisions of space and privacy, offering larger homes and yards for diverse activities. The increased physical distance between houses fosters a sense of privacy, a distinctive feature absent in densely populated areas. Affordability takes center stage in this vision, making ownership an achievable dream for a diverse demographic. The lower cost of living, coupled with affordable housing options, fosters an inclusive community where residents can allocate resources towards education, hospice, and communal engagement. Education thrives in the dream suburb, where schools boasting lower student-to-teacher ratios, well-funded programs, and ample resources. Family-friendly environments flourish, featuring parks, playgrounds, and community centers that nurture a sense of community and social connections. Moreover, this dream suburb strategically positions itself as a commuting haven, ensuring easy access to cities for professionals. Thank you for your time, and dream suburbs are the way to go.
Thank you. So next, we're going to move on to the second question. So the second question for this section is, Connecticut State Law 830G has been somewhat controversial since it was passed in 1989, but controversy has increased in recent years. This law mandates that 10% of housing in Connecticut towns, including Greenwich, be deemed capital A affordable, meaning that landlords are subsidized to cap their rents or tie them to tenant income. According to your position, should this law be upheld, modified, or repealed? Should the government go even further than this to enforce affordable housing, and why? Caitlin, we'll start with you, 1.5 minutes.
830G was a law enacted in 1989 that grants developers substantial authority to construct housing while ensuring 30% of new units are deemed affordable. Regrettably, after more than 3 decades, over 80% of Connecticut's municipalities, including affluent ones like Greenwich, remain well below the mandated 10% threshold for affordable housing. This underscores the law's ineffectiveness in promoting affordable housing throughout the state, hence it should be repealed. The law exhibits inherent unfairness, particularly favoring larger cities like Hartford and New Haven. These cities, having received substantial funds, vouchers, and state or federal loans for housing projects before the law's enactment, were exempt from 830G as they had already surpassed the 10% threshold. Consequently, the burden of compliance falls disproportionately on smaller municipalities, particularly suburbs and rural communities, which rarely receive state funding for affordable housing development. As a counterplan, I propose the empowerment of each town government to devise its own policies to foster affordable housing, recognizing the nuanced definition of affordability that varies from town to town. Municipalities can tailor their approaches based on unique factors such as location, population characteristics, supply and demand dynamics, and economic structure. To replace the existing 830G law, governments should consider actively investing in affordable housing projects and offering incentives to developers committing to constructing affordable units. Private landlords can accept housing vouchers, and developers can help reduce overcrowding with incentives. By embracing a more flexible and locally driven approach, Connecticut has the opportunity to reshape its housing policy, fostering inclusivity and addressing the unique needs of each municipality, ultimately creating a more equitable and effective system. Thank you for your time, and thus I affirm.
Thank you for these responses. We'll now move on to the lightning round. This is a special feature for tonight's event, and we're testing the debaters' abilities to think on their feet. Each debater will get a question that they've never seen before that is custom tailored to their position, and just a minute to respond. So Pombo, we'll start with you. The current state of government subsidized housing is
Wait, sorry. That was only one response to the 830G question.
Oh, was it actually?
Yeah.
All right, that's my bad. So yeah, lightning rounds coming in a couple minutes. But all right. So Maggie, sorry.
So Connecticut state law 830G is similar to a lot of other government interventions that some of my opponents have been mentioning. It's completely counterproductive to the functioning of the housing market. While its intention may be to address housing affordability issues, it has unintended consequences that undermine free market competition and individual property rights, and it should be repealed. 830G distorts market incentives and discourages investment in housing development by imposing mandatory quotas and rent controls. It reduces the profitability of housing projects, which leads developers to abandon their plans. This can exacerbate housing shortages and drive up prices as supply fails to keep up with demand. Rent control measures such as 830G can create inefficiencies in the housing market by reducing turnover and the quality and quantity of available rental units. Landlords may be less inclined to invest in maintenance if they are unable to regain their costs through their higher rents, which leads to deteriorating housing conditions. Instead of upholding or expanding 830G, a free market perspective advocates for policies that remove regulatory barriers to housing development by streamlining zoning and permitting processes and providing incentives for private sector investment in affordable housing projects. The government can support these affordable housing initiatives through targeted subsidies and tax incentives that would encourage developers to include affordable units in their projects. And this approach would empower individuals and businesses to respond to housing demand in a flexible manner without the need for heavy-handed government intervention. Connecticut's 830G is not conducive to fostering a vibrant and efficient housing market. Instead, policymakers should focus on encouraging private sector investment and innovation in affordable housing while respecting property rights and market dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you. Aubrey?
I don't support 830G because it, like most government housing schemes, encourages unnatural development. So I'll give the example of the quote-unquote dream suburbs that we've been discussing to show some of the problems with unnatural development. So they're essentially counter to economics. We don't see a lot of plain rural areas in these ideal locations right next to large major cities and ideal places for commuting because those places are already developed. And we don't see many, rural communities that can suddenly be transformed into suburbs, and just by building some more homes there, we're going to have a beacon of economic activity. In fact, those communities will not be sustainable. So how does this relate? I think that 830G creates the same problems with unnatural housing development. So let me give you an example of how it does this from the town of Weston, Connecticut. So Weston, Connecticut has arguably one of the most restrictive and insular zoning policies in the state. The entire town is 2-acre zoned, and you are not allowed to rent a multiple family home. So unsurprisingly, the cheapest homes on the market in Weston, Connecticut are close to $1 million, and averages are well over $2 million. So now they're going to be forced by 830G to build some affordable housing. And the residents are currently debating how to put it in the most inconvenient place possible, and how are these people going to be part of the community when it's totally counter to the rest of the community in terms of the ideals informing the planning and in terms of the income level that the residents are going to have. We need reforms to encourage density and not just forcing affordable housing developments. A more adequate law could attack high acreage zoning restrictions and allow communities like Weston to develop in a way that's natural to them. So a variety of other reforms are needed, but 830G is not the way, and neither is any scheme that attempts to force the complete redevelopment of a community.
Time. Thank you. Alex?
I'm gonna say something no one said so far, and that is that it should be upheld. And my reason for saying that is because I don't disagree with its ineffectiveness, and it's obviously not doing what it's supposed to do. But what type of precedent are we setting for these towns in Greenwich if we're repealing after they are deliberately going against and trying to go against this 830G law? Now, obviously, by doing that, we're encouraging the private sector to come in and I promise you that the private sector, their business, they think business-wise. They're not coming in to try to create more affordable housing. They're coming in for profits. And kind of touching more on this, like, it's what this 830G is, in the words of Anika Singh Lamar, a professor at Yale University who specializes in housing, it is one of the very small number of tools they have at their disposal to ensure that towns like Shelton, New Canaan, and Glastonbury follow the law and use their zoning and are forced to accommodate for affordable housing. And if we take this away, we kind of restart everything that we were trying to build. And it shows weakness as the federal government to do this and to basically say to these people who obviously don't want this affordable housing here that, okay, you guys pushed back a little, we accept it, we give up. And that's the precedent that rejecting this law sets, or not upholding it.
Thank you. Jennifer?
So according to my position, not in my backyard, this law should either be modified or repealed. Modification should include disincluding of historical houses, mansions, beach houses, the things that we own as citizens sitting here in this town hall. Like, we need to protect our assets because we truly worked hard for them. In terms of repealment, even better. This law should be repealed. Sorry, Alex. Because affordable housing has many risks. As the elephant in the room, affordable housing has the following risk. One, it risks loss of local businesses and a loss of community. People will feel less connected, understood less when there is a sudden change to the community's character, such as an influx of 20 to 30 families, which is often the minimum that affordable housing may induct into a community. So Second, it also comes with many other building structures. Often a large infrastructure policy or project may bring in the creation of power plants, factories, chemical facilities, which may even increase pollution. Fourth, an increased amount of resources are going to be needed. We're going to be creating more churches, more houses, more schools to accommodate these people, and even worse, more congestion, more costs for sending our children to school, and also more police and fire department stress. Thank you.
Thank you. Pombo?
I'd like to start by agreeing with Alex and saying that Connecticut State Law 830G needs to be upheld. If anything, it should be modified to be able to create more affordable housing. Certain people on the stage have said that certain communities are too expensive, and that these communities that want to keep their houses and their property value expensive for their own benefit would put these affordable houses in the most inconvenient spaces possible and get them away from the rest of the people. However, I'd like to ask you a question. Would you rather have a house in an inconvenient location or have no house at all and be homeless? That's the question that many are faced with. And obviously, you're going to want to have an inconvenient house over no house at all. And it doesn't matter that these new tenants or homeowners would be coming into the community. They wouldn't be driving out business. If anything, they would be adding more customers and more demand for the current businesses, prospering these cities that are growing. It is the state's and the local government's responsibilities to keep houses affordable and allow people to live without having to struggle to find a roof over their head. The private sector is not going to do it. This needs to be a public market for a public thing that is housing. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the lightning round. So like I said, this is going to test the debaters' abilities to think on their feet. They've never seen these questions before, and they're just going to have to think in the moment. So Pombo, we'll start with you. The current state of government-subsidized housing is notoriously shaky, with Section 8 housing projects being some of the most violent and squalid places in America. How do you think the government can avoid this in future initiatives?
Well, the government can avoid this in future initiatives by simply creating the infrastructure that people need for houses instead of doing it reactively. Most of the infrastructure, like electricity, police, water, fire departments, all the stuff like that, are built after the houses reactionarily to what the people need instead of proactively. What governments need to do is proactively think of what these new houses, these new housing projects will create a demand for, and allow those things to be able to be created with the building proactively, so that we don't have violent communities like those that have been currently brought up through 830G, so that these communities are actually functioning and could integrate well with the rest of society. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, where does affordable housing get zoned and built if everyone says not in my backyard to the idea of building it? 1 minute.
Well, my first response is still not in my backyard. I don't want these houses anywhere in my backyard, not near my house, not near my neighborhood's house. I've provided a bunch of solutions, which include like building community houses or like renovating like abandoned shopping malls, or even turning towards tiny houses and like getting rid of standardized codes and turning towards modular construction. There are definitely solutions, but these solutions don't involve my backyard.
Thank you. Alex, non-market housing can be facilitated by the government or charitable organizations. Which one of these is better and why?
As we have it right now, charitable organizations take on the majority of non-market housing. But as I've talked about throughout this, to get a real solution to lower the cost of mean housing in this country, we need the government to step up and take a role in that. And as I've talked about, we need to create a unitary housing market, and the government needs to do this. I'm very happy that you asked this question, because I've almost touched on most of this already. But kind of to elaborate on it a little bit, like, it isn't a private market. It shouldn't be a private market. Housing is a fundamental human right and should be treated as such. And therefore, the government should be a part and take part in paying for non-market housing.
Thank you. Aubrey, if the buildings in future dense housing communities are planned and built largely at the same time, how do you deal with technology and building standards eventually becoming obsolete for these developments?
Sure, and that's why I would suggest that we don't need to build them all at the same time. So I would say that allowing for the natural development, as many communities around the country are doing, instead of planning a whole new city, we can work with people who are likely to construct to allow for the construction of certain things. And in most communities, that's going to mean gradual development. And in the case of mega projects, I think that the risk of everything becoming outdated at once is certainly a real risk, and that's why I think the solution is, unlike some of the policies which propose to build entirely new types of housing, to confine people in need of affordable housing to new and exciting forms of the most inconvenient housing possible. I think we can allow for the natural growth of high density communities that support our needs. And as long as what we're doing is allowing rather than forcing these developments on communities, we're going to see a natural development pattern that will not expire all at the same time, because that's not how demand generally functions in a community, with it being all at once. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie, the free market allows for people in control of the market to be generous, but also to be greedy and to take advantage of the poor, especially in the housing market. How does your solution ensure that greed and rent or price hiking doesn't dominate the market? 1 minute.
So again, with the private market, the main focus of that is going to be competition, right? So with the laws of supply and demand, right? If we are supplying people with housing, then the demand for it is going to go down. So obviously, we're all recognizing here that affordability and finding housing, and there's a housing crisis, that we need to find a solution to it. So if people are all trying to find housing and they're all asking to get developers to build housing, then obviously these developers need to tailor to these people's needs. They need to figure out, how can I get these people to buy my houses, to, whatever I'm building, how can they be the ones who are purchasing it and helping me? And this is not necessarily taking advantage of the poor, because again, when these people are, competing, these land developers are competing for creating these housing, they're gonna have to compete with each other. They're gonna have to figure out how to make these prices go down so that people are actually willing to pay the prices for these housing projects that they're making. And again, some people up here have said that, the private market is not the approach that we should take to address the housing crisis. But the reason that the private market and the free market is not working right now is because of government intervention, because we have these zoning regulations in place. In Greenwich, again, they cap density at 18 units an acre, and they cap building heights at 4 stories, and they have large swaths of land with 4-acre lot minimums. And this is why we can't build housing in the private market, and that's why the private market is not working. But if we get rid of government intervention, it will work. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Caitlin, gas-powered cars, which make up the vast majority of American vehicles, are known to be a major contributor to global carbon emissions. Cars are currently central to the suburban lifestyle in America. Is this an issue, and how do you think we should navigate this?
Yes, so I do believe that we definitely have to work towards making climate change less of a severe issue, and this is a huge issue that affects our future. However, I want to look to my colleagues and realize that their solutions will be harming the environment even more. If you look at densely populated homes, they're going to be releasing they're going to be taking hugest amount of oil, they're going to be releasing so many emissions, so much pollution to the environment. Therefore, suburban areas, out of all of these ideas, is the best solution for the environment.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to our last section and our last question, which is on policy and local. Housing policy can be controversial in communities like Greenwich that have a broad, diverse range of incomes. Our last question for tonight is, what should the future of housing policy look like specifically in our town? How should people get involved to affect change in our housing market in this town? Caitlin, we'll start with you, 1.5 minutes.
Just off time before I begin, since this is my last speech, I just want to say that what a great event today has been and the wonderful job that all of my colleagues have done. So I applaud everyone. And okay, without further ado, Greenwich, renowned as a suburb in close proximity to New York City, stands as a model of affluent living in Connecticut. Adorned with parks, beaches, diverse shopping and dining options, and boasting one of the school's best districts, Greenwich offers residents an idyllic suburban lifestyle. However, the ineffectiveness of 830G proves that one-size public policy does not fit all of our diverse 169 cities' needs. We need a policy that helps preserve these premium features of our town with zoning regulations, and at the same time, develop more affordable housing and add supporting facilities to make it more inclusive to everyone in our community. Given the scarcity of housing inventory and escalating home prices, collaborative efforts between local government, the state, private sectors, and residents are imperative to expand affordable housing. A viable strategy involves prioritizing dedicated 100% affordable housing development projects to expedite the increase in affordable units. Town authorities can contribute through subsidies, partial funding, and offering financial incentives to developers supporting these projects. This approach aims to surpass the conventional 30% affordable, 70% market ratio, ensuring a more rapid response to the pressing need for affordable housing. Connecticut grapples with a housing market in crisis, characterized by a scarcity of available homes, soaring rent and home prices, escalating evictions, and a rising homeless population. By championing a locally informed, nuanced housing policy, Greenwich can serve as a beacon of sustainable and inclusive living, addressing the pressing challenges that afflict our broader state. Addressing the plight of low-income families who contribute significantly to our town's well-being requires a focused effort. Government support and increased affordable housing availability, like suburbs, will allow these individuals to reside closer to their workplaces, minimizing long commutes. Overall, the vision for Greenwich is clear. A town with accessible and inclusive housing for everyone, while the vision for the country is also clear. Increase suburbs through the use of modern 3D technology instead of unreasonably making dense areas even more uncomfortable. Thank you for everyone that listened tonight, and finally, I affirm.
Thank you. Maggie?
Again, someone had to say thank you for allowing us to have this opportunity to talk about such an important topic and to allow us to do it in such a respectful manner. With that, I'll get into my answer. The future of housing policy in Greenwich should prioritize removing barriers to housing development and promoting competition and innovation in the housing market. I would like to reiterate that we need to allow for a full free market where people say what they need and those needs are met. We need to allow for competition and innovation to do this. Right now we have the government regulation, and that government regulation, it artificially regulates the laws of demand and supply. But we need to make sure that these demand and supply is actually met. And if people are saying, that the free market hasn't worked in the past, but it hasn't worked in the past, and it's because we don't have a free market, because we have government intervention, because we have things like zoning. We have zoning policies that make it harder to build housing. So we need to update these zoning regulations to reflect current market conditions and community needs. And Greenwich can incentivize these with these development of diverse housing options that cater to different income levels and lifestyles. We can also explore public-private partnerships and incentive programs that encourage developers to include affordable housing units in their projects. This may involve tax incentives, density bonuses, or expedited permitting for projects that meet certain affordability criteria. Greenwich can invest in infrastructure and transportation improvements that increase access to housing support and support sustainable development patterns. To create change in the housing market, Greenwich residents can get involved by advocating for policy reforms, by participating in public hearings and community meetings, and by supporting candidates who prioritize housing affordability and market-based solutions. By engaging with local government officials and community stakeholders, individuals can help shape the future of housing policy in Greenwich and ensure that it aligns with the principles of free market economics and individual freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Aubrey?
Greenwich is a great community, but it's an unequal community, and that's a reflection of the way that it has developed over time. So Greenwich, because of historically redlining, the western part of Greenwich was the only part accessible to Irish people and Hispanic people and various other minority groups who were not able to get home loans in the central and eastern parts of Greenwich. That's now been reinforced by zoning regulations that still do not allow non-single family development in the east of Greenwich and Old Greenwich, and only recently began to allow it in central Greenwich. So a great start would be to allow multifamily zoning in eastern Greenwich, because essentially the purpose of this being zoned single family, when the Old Greenwich area naturally would likely have multiple multifamily developments, was to ensure inequality and the homogeneity of the community. We should undo this regulation in order to promote inclusiveness and increase the diversity of our community. So I would suggest that our current pattern of development needs to be fixed in certain ways. But I would caution us against the full free market approach. I know I've mostly disagreed with the great planning approaches, but I would say that if we're going to eliminate all zoning and development regulations, that's been tried before in cities like Houston and a variety of suburbs, and it often leads to patterns of development that look even more unnatural. So I can say that we should be strategic about the way we zone. And how does that start? That starts with us going to more town meetings. So I think that the town meetings in Greenwich right now are essentially dominated by the people who have time to go to them. And as a result, the status quo gets perpetuated because the people who have the most to lose are the people who don't want to see their home values fall, and therefore they protect their own interests at the community meetings. What we need to do is start advocating for the interests of the common good at the Greenwich community meetings and advocating for the abolition of these laws which prevent the development of affordable housing. Affordable housing is not created or built, it is allowed for, and that's why we need to start getting involved in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
First of all, I'd like to start by thanking everyone who came, thanking you, thanking the other panelists. This has been a really unique and cool experience. I believe it was my colleague Jennifer Yin who said, "Not in my backyard." And to that, I respond, yes, in my backyard. And what I mean by that is Greenwich as a town needs to set a precedent as one of the most affluent and wealthy towns in America that non-market and affordable housing is the key to solving this housing crisis. We as a town are blessed and lucky to have a large influx of resources and a large surplus of resources that not many other towns in this country are able to have. And with these resources, we shouldn't allocate them to frivolous things. Rather, we should allocate them to being a model of how to solve this terrible housing crisis. Because in all this, in people coming to this town hall trying to keep their housing prices up and all this backlash towards it, we forget that housing is for people and it's not for profits. And with that, I affirm.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Okay. My time will start in the count of 3, 2, 1. That insult was unneeded, but everyone's formalities were better than mine, so here I go. What should the future of housing policy look like in our town? Let's look at that blue painting over there, right? It should be one that is unrestrained and free, with the existence of cottages to the left, beach houses in the back, churches in the right, mansions in the right. It should be special, it should be filled with preservable heritage, and it should lastly be diverse. So now on to the second question. How should people get involved to create effective change? We should exercise our constitutionally guaranteed rights, freedom of speech and protest, and freedom of press. So what can we do as an individual, right? We can speak out, we can form civil societies, or we can also form community organizations to seek change. Yes, I learned that from AP Comp. Also, we should encourage the government to create a world without standardized building codes, a world without zone laws, without procurement and labor requirements. I can't even pronounce all these new laws. So the government should first protect and expand the National Housing Trust Fund, which advances racial equity and reduces economic disparities through practice and policy. It should also preserve and increase resources for federal affordable housing programs. And lastly, it should ensure federal disaster recovery efforts are fair and equitable and offer compensation to all. I've loved today, and I negate. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Pombo.
I'd like to conclude this session by thanking everyone who came and thanking Saya, our chair, and our 2 judges. But I would like to conclude by saying yes, in not just my backyard, but in your backyard. We need to stop people with their own interests in mind from coming in and preventing affordable housing from being built because it might destroy their housing, their property value. If we let the private sector do its thing, like many of the people on this stage have proposed, the prices will only go up because that's what benefits the private sector. They just want profit. However, this is not about profit. This is about housing, a human right. And as Jennifer, my colleague here, said, the painting over there, it should be diverse. However, it's not going to be diverse if everyone says, no, not in my backyard. It needs to be allowed for houses that benefit lower income community members to be built everywhere. And zoning should not prevent these houses from being built in zones that ideally would have higher property values. We need to be able to create more housing that people can afford without hurting those at the very bottom of the income ladder. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to the judging and voting segment. While the judges have a few minutes to assign points to our debaters and decide awards, you, the audience, will get the chance to vote for who you thought won tonight's debate. If you please scan the QR codes on the slips of paper on your seats or navigate to the link on the screen in front of you, you'll get a chance to cast your vote, and we'll regroup in a couple minutes. No, you guys can't vote. Yeah, our panelists can't vote. All right, so we're going to have a minute more for debating, for voting. So for anyone who has not voted yet, please do so. And then we'll decide on the winner. Okay, so I think that's all of our votes. So looks like Maggie won our debate overall. So we'll now reveal the awards for the student debaters. So first up, the award for outstanding rhetoric, which is issued to the debater who has the most convincing, clear, and well thought out arguments, goes to Aubrey. Congratulations. Next, the award for outstanding conduct and etiquette, which is issued to the debater who presents most respectfully and honorably, both toward the judges and toward other debaters, goes to Caitlin. And finally, the honorable mention for public speaking, which is issued to the debater who delivered a convincing argument with particularly good public speaking skills, goes to Alex Sagan. Congratulations. So those are our awards and our winner for tonight, and that just about wraps up tonight's event. I want to give a special thanks to Danielle, who is the Youth Services Bureau Administration for County Greenwich. She helps the FSYC get things done. She's amazing. She's been crucial to carrying out this project. I also want to thank my subcommittee members on the FSYC for helping with outreach on this project, as well as our judges, Ms. Petrelli and Mr. Jones. Joy's gone now, but I want to thank Joy from GHS for showing up to film this project. And finally, I want to thank our student debaters, since this event wouldn't be possible without them. As well as all of you in the audience for showing up tonight, and all of the other people who I haven't mentioned. There's a bunch of them who helped out with this project and make this possible. I truly hope that tonight has been a positive, productive example of how civil debate about hot issues can happen in our town and the greater United States. Thank you all and have a great night.